Greg Kelly enlisted in the U.S. Marines in 1995 as an infantryman in the 2nd Marine Division. He joined the Army in 2001, and he screened for service with Special Forces. In 2006, he earned the coveted Green Beret, and he was assigned to the 19th Special Forces Group, where he held key leadership positions, tasked with counterterrorism, intelligence gathering, and unconventional warfare. He deployed to Africa, South America, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Balkans. Greg was selected to serve as Sergeant Major, the command senior enlisted leader. He retired from the military in 2022 with 27 years of service after sustaining significant injuries from a parachuting accident while preparing for his next mission. Greg is a third-generation Boston firefighter. He served at Ground Zero in New York City after the terrorist attacks in 2001. He's a co-founder of the Massachusetts Fallen Heroes Memorial Fund, a highly impactful nonprofit organization established in 2010 to honor fallen service members, support Gold Star families, and empower veterans. Please welcome Greg Kelly.
Just we were talking before everybody logged on, but essentially this would be a little bit different for me where when you can't see everybody's smiling faces, you don't really know, you don't have that feedback, so you don't necessarily know what people are kind of keying into, or so it's, for me, it's going to be like I'm talking to myself for the next hour. So bear with me if it's kind of different or awkward where you don't have that live feedback from people, or at least for me it is. So with that said, it's great to be back. Great to be back with you. I'm sorry that that it didn't get recorded when we initially did it, but here we go. Well, I'm going to try to keep this to about an hour, and then take some questions. And one of my favorite subjects, U.S. Special Operations Forces. Let's see. We'll roll right into it. I'm going to leave I know all of you can see the slides. This is the presenter view, but I'm going to leave that up there so I can tell if I'm keeping a good pace or not, or if I need to speed up. So, and you might get a little preview of whatever the next slide's going to be. So I'm going to be covering the evolution of Special Operations Forces, kind of where did all these different units, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Rangers, what are they, where'd they come from, and how they came into being and what they do now, and a little bit of a view into what the future is going to look like. So a little SOF is Special Operations Forces. You hear a lot of people refer to Special Forces, but that actually refers exclusively to the Green Berets. When within the Special Operations Forces community, when you say Special Forces, everyone in there knows you're not talking about SEALs or Rangers or anybody else. You're talking about the Green Berets. But on the outside, so that's why it's always the SOF term. Okay, so we'll talk about the American, the early American SOF very briefly. We'll jump into the World War II. I'm skipping over Korea, Vietnam. No, I'm sorry, not Vietnam, but Korea and a lot of other key periods because of the time constraint. There's just so much to cover with this rich history for all these units. I'll dive into Vietnam because that's kind of the coming of age there. Desert One and the establishment of SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command, which is the 4-star overarching command that kind of commands all special ops forces, ultimately report to the same single boss, whether you're in the Navy, the Marines, or the Army or Air Force. So I'm going to be skipping over some very important things that happened in the 80s and 90s that contributed to the evolution of SOF. Again, primarily due to the time constraints. I'm going to hit what I regard as the key wave tops there. And of course, 9/11, unconventional warfare, and a few other things there. So GWAT is a global war on terrorism. And I'll cover a little bit of the current and future operational environment. Whenever I talk to anybody about war and warfare, most of you, I think, if you're students of military history, will know who this guy is. That's Major Dick Winters of the famous 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, the famous Band of Brothers. And Major Winters was considered the biggest brother. He was the commander of that unit, and he was loved by his men. And he had a great quote in his book right there. It's Conversations with Major Dick Winters. He was one of the great tactical leaders. There's a lot of books about the generals and all that. This guy right here is one of the great tactical leaders of World War II, and he remained a leader throughout his life. And I really like this quote: "Wars do not make men great, but sometimes war brings out the greatness in good men." So I recommend that book. I'll recommend quite a few books as we go through this. A little bit on my background in service that was covered briefly. Started off in the Marines. That's me as a baby-faced Marine. After I got out of the Marines, I did 4 years in the 2nd Marine Division, and then 1 year in the 4th Marine Division, which is the Reserve Marine Division. They have a battalion up here in Massachusetts that I served with for 1 year. During that year, I got on the City of Boston Fire Department. Had about a little bit over a year on the fire department by the time 9/11 happened. And several hundred of us from Boston Fire actually wound up going down to New York City and serving there and working on what was known as the pile. And then in the press was referred to as Ground Zero. On the right there, as you look at that picture, that's myself and my brother, Ed. My brother, Ed Kelly, Edzo Kelly, kind of a famous person within the fire service, and he's the current general secretary treasurer of the International Association of Firefighters. I'm sorry, let me correct that. He was the general secretary treasurer. He is now the general president of the International Association of Firefighters, and that's us as young men down at Ground Zero. And what I want to underscore is over the course of my military career, which went from the Marines to Army Special Forces, shortly after the Ground Zero and the the war broke out, I really committed myself to getting qualified to serve within Special Forces, the Green Berets, and early on in the war, we saw I had just joined the Special Forces unit at that time, but I was not a qualified soldier. I was kind of in their recruit pool. And once this happened, and we saw the Green Berets kind of take over Afghanistan with U.S. air power and really running the guerrilla warfare campaign against the Taliban, I really committed myself to want to be part of this organization. And with that, I had the privilege to serve with so many people from every branch of the service. And I was always proud to say that I served in combat with members of each branch of the service. And they all have unique roles and are very good at and committed to what they do. And having seen the greatness that Major Winters talk about in great people and great men in battle, I've been privileged to have seen that greatness in good men. The Mass Fallen Heroes piece that came around 2010, and again, honor, support, and empower. Honor the fallen, support Gold Star families, and empower our veterans. So we have various programs and services for that, and you can check it out at massfallenheroes.org. So Special Operations Forces, something that always fascinated me even before I joined. When I was a conventional force Marine, I had interacted with SEALs and actually Force Recon Marines and Green Berets over my travels and time in service. And I was always very impressed with their professionalism and expertise and also their mission set. It always seemed very shadowy and exciting. So something that drew me in. So what are Special Operations Forces? Loosely break down into two kind of main lines of effort: surgical strike forces and special warfare forces. Okay, surgical strike forces, as it says, it squeezes out uncertainty and then strikes. So these are surgical strike. These are your commando forces, and if you will, it's like, hey, go do this thing or complete this special task and be back by breakfast. Kind of like the raider, go in, strike, and withdraw. And then the special warfare component, that's more of a persistent pressure. Okay, so that's more of like a campaign. It might look more like, hey, we're going to put Green Berets into Colombia, for example, and 5 years from now, we want the FARC guerrillas who are going against the government down there. we want these guerrillas to be, say 80% less influential in this region. Okay, it's a much more, I'll say, complex, uh, persistent pressure type campaign versus the surgical strike. Go in, hit something, and get out. So some of those letters there. So on the surgical strike, I have the example of HR is hostage rescue, DA direct action, CT counterterrorism. Okay. Under special warfare, I've got irregular warfare, foreign internal defense, unconventional warfare, security force assistance, SFA, special reconnaissance, counter narcotics, and preparation of the environment for longer duration type operations. Okay. So what is all of that? I'll try to do it very quickly here, but foreign internal defense is essentially where our advisors are going in to work with another government, take Iraq, for example, and we're going to help that government prop up and protect against an insurgency. Unconventional warfare, that's where we are the insurgents, if you will. We go in and we link up with the partisans, and you think about the French resistance, think about the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, and that's where our advisors link up with combat power that's already there on the ground, and we kind of organize it and help them achieve mutually desired end states. So that's so on foreign internal defense, FID, we're propping up the government. On unconventional warfare, we're toppling the government. Okay, so it's the same mission, just inverted. And then security force assistance, that's like keeping the war out, if you will. So when you look at FID, UW, and SFA, that's you take the tri-border region between Syria, where we're doing unconventional warfare, working with guerrillas. In Iraq, we're doing FID, working against guerrillas. And then security forces assistance in Jordan, where we're trying to keep the war from spilling over. Okay, so that's kind of the special warfare versus the surgical strike stuff. And that's why I say guerrillas versus commandos. And that's kind of the commando as that strike soldier, and the guerrilla as kind of that working behind enemy lines for extended periods. Another often overlooked component to special operations forces is the psychological operations, information operations. I have Sean McFate and T.E. Lawrence listed there. Sean McFate wrote a book that you'll see it at some point in the slide here, and his book was called The New Rules of War. And in there, he said, he had a great quote about psychological operations. He said, "Who cares about the sword if I can control the arm that wields it?" Additionally, T.E. Lawrence, the famous Lawrence of Arabia from World War I, who kind of harnessed indigenous combat power and made really divisions of guerrilla forces on the Arabian Peninsula during World War I. T.E. Lawrence famously said the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is the printing press. And he talked about the ability to use information to sway the behaviors and opinions of the masses. And we see psychological operations being used against us every day, fomenting division within our country. And a lot of that is externally fomented by nation state adversaries of the United States. Clandestine, covert, and overt. Overt is what it sounds like. You're out there in the open. Clandestine is it's an activity that conceals, okay, the existence of an event. Okay, whereas covert, it doesn't conceal the event, but it conceals the identity of the sponsor. So, for example, on a covert strike, a building got attacked, the bad guy, everyone got wiped out, the building's on fire, but no one knows who did it. That's a covert strike. Clandestine, it's like putting sugar in the gas tank. It manifests as engine trouble, but so on the outside it just looks like engine trouble, but really there's a underlying sabotage going on there. So that's what clandestine conceals the existence of an event. Covert conceals the identity of the sponsor of an event. Okay, these are important terms in special operations and intelligence operations. Okay, our key task is to be where our country needs us before they need us there. Okay, so that's where it says human terrain. We're working the human terrain as special operations forces, and a kind of repeated term is you cannot surge trust, right? I can surge tanks, I can bring in additional firepower and fighter jets, but I cannot surge trust. That trust has to be built in advance of turmoil and chaos and whatnot. So that's where right now you see our special operations forces are deployed to, probably somewhere in the 80s or 90 or so countries around the world. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to be where our country needs us before they need us there. So we already have relationships with key leaders and key people, prior to the crisis. Okay. Elite versus specialized, conventional versus irregular. It's kind of some important distinctions. So, pictured there are U.S. Marines. Okay. These are certainly elite troops. They are specialized in that they are specialized in forcible entry from the sea at up to like division, even corps level. Okay. And so they're a large force, 170,000. Conversely, if you think about the British Marines, I think are about 6 or 8,000 maybe. So the U.S. Marines are quite a large force. So probably the entirety of them are not, necessarily elite, but they're certainly their infantry are trained to an elite standard as far as global infantry goes. 82nd Airborne is another example of a elite force. They're specialized in airborne forcible entry. But they are also conventional, just like the Marines. They are a conventional force. Conversely, pictured there is my members of my old Special Forces team, and you can see that we are with irregular forces in this picture. Some of these guys, none of them are professional troops. In other words, a conventional soldier would be a professional full-time soldier. An irregular troop, oftentimes, he could be a farmer, he could be whatever line of work he's from. And that's really what the Green Berets specialize in, is irregular warfare. Also, the Marine Raiders have a great focus on irregular warfare. And that's your foreign internal defense, unconventional warfare, things like that. In this picture, that would be a good depiction of unconventional warfare, where you have my team and they just blend right in. You really can't tell which ones are from my team and which ones are Afghanis, and that is purposeful. Okay, so we are in that case, the Green Berets are elite, certainly specialized in guerrilla warfare and irregular. Okay, here's the Army, a picture of Army Rangers. Okay, so these guys are definitely elite, definitely specialized, but they are conventional as opposed to irregular. And so they work primarily, everybody can work with partner forces, of course, but they specialized in unilateral surgical strike. And that's kind of their forte, if you will. These guys are America's premier, infantry raid force. And they're trained and equipped and selected specifically for that. I bring up von Clausewitz here. This is our I'm sorry, just got distracted there for a second. This is von Clausewitz is he's a Prussian strategist, and he talks about bringing combat power to bear, bringing all your artillery to bear at the single point, at the key moment in the battle. And even the word combat power comes out of his book On War. And it's talking about projecting conventional force at a critical point in a battle to achieve victory. Conversely, so our conventional force leaders are trained and think in the von Clausewitz method of the application of force. Our special operations forces are more of the Sun Tzu line of thinking. It's not to say that both don't study both of these strategists. Of course we do. But the von Clausewitz was more the conventional military, the way we think of it now. And Sun Tzu was more of the unconventional, the way we think of unconventional, subdue the enemy without fighting. He talks about the acumen of combat being to subdue the enemy without fighting. He says the battle should be won before the first action is initiated. And that has to do with all the preparation of the battle space and the environment ahead of the actual combat. So a little bit of a contrast in kind of how to achieve end states. And we see the Chinese kind of follow that more than projecting conventional traditional combat power. I'll get more into that in a few slides here. Okay, so soft truths and soft imperatives. This is something you can Google. I won't read the soft imperatives, but it's you can look these up on the internet. This is all. Of course, this brief is completely unclassified. Everything I'm saying is you can just look up. So the soft imperatives are interesting because it kind of gives you an idea of where the command wants the special operations forces thinking. As unconventional soldiers, and also as oftentimes, again, being in 90 countries, some of our guys are the only Americans in that country. So it might be a team of 12 guys in that country, and that's it. That's kind of, maybe there's some back at the embassy, but these are the only guys out kind of in the hinterlands. So they want them thinking bigger, not just thinking like a rifleman or basic tactics. On the soft truths, there's some pretty good takeaways there. Humans are more important than hardware. Soft cannot be mass produced. Quality is better than quantity. And the last one, special operations require non-special operations support. So it's still a whole of force approach. Most of what we do, they're going to be some type of non-special operations forces in support of what we're doing. This is pretty interesting. The Green Berets put a lot of work into specifically what they were looking for in a recruit. So it goes back to their Special Forces Assessment and Selection course, often simply just referred to as selection, SFAS. And since then, all other Special Operations Forces adopted these 9 attributes. So drive, resiliency, adaptability. And then the notes next to them aren't necessarily a definition. It's just my interpretation of them. Okay, drive, unrelenting drive, resiliency, you bounce back, and becoming this solution, the adaptability. Oftentimes, you're going into austere environments with kind of loose guidance in a commander's intent, and kind of what you briefed as the initial plan might go out the window as soon as you are faced with the reality on the ground. But being adaptable, mature soldiers, you can adapt. You can shift to, again, focus not on executing what you briefed, but driving towards the desired end state. Humility, integrity, and effective intelligence. Okay, ego is the enemy. I wrote there. That's a book. It's pretty good. It's humility to me is a key leadership trait. Okay, and you're open to better ideas than your own. Okay, basics. Integrity, honorable, right, just, own your mistakes. Effective intelligence. There's a lot of people out there that are like super smart, but maybe they're not necessarily going to be the best fit in the special operations environment. And some people do better under more supervision, where a lot of times we have a lot of lack of immediate supervision. You can't just look over your shoulder and talk to your boss all the time. Sometimes you just have to come up with the solution yourself. So you do have people out there that are like supremely intelligent, but they can't translate that intelligence into what's best down at the street level. So we kind of street smart guys, if you will. Team ability, curiosity, challenge the status quo, more effective solutions. Okay, that's what, don't just, well, the book says we should do it this way. Why does the book say that? And that's where we get into a mindset of don't tell me how to do something, just tell me what you want done. And then the team, with its professionalism and maturity and experience, will build out the best solution for that desired end state. And of course, emotional strength, poise under pressure. Okay, early American Special Operations Forces, the French and Indian War, Swamp Fox, Civil War. Okay, I'll cover this very briefly. Rogers Rangers, I'm going to get into him here in a minute, but he goes back to the French and Indian War, and he was out there ranging. Okay, he was more like what Green Berets would be, which is just out there kind of scouting around, out in the hinterlands, working with indigenous forces, and in his case, Native American Indians. But very accomplished raider, intelligence collection, ambush behind enemy lines, popping up where the enemy does not expect him to be, that sort of thing. The Swamp Fox, Francis Marion. Mel Gibson's character was loosely based on the Swamp Fox in the movie The Patriot, and same thing. Okay, popping up where the enemy doesn't expect, ambush instead of direct, force on force confrontation. They're ambushing convoys and rolling up equipment and weapons and so forth. The Partisan Ranger Act, Mosby's Rangers. Mosby was a Confederate, but the Partisan Ranger Act allowed in the Confederates for the establishment of Mosby's Rangers, which was started off as a company-sized unit. They grew it, and again, same thing: go behind enemy lines, stir up trouble, gather intelligence, disrupt the enemy where they think they're safe. Okay, the term commando came from the Second Boer War. That was South Africa. That was the Brits fighting in South Africa, and that's where the term commando came from. And again, what were they? The same. They were popping up where they weren't expected to be. They weren't acting like regular soldiers. They weren't meeting you force on force. They were ambushing you. They were stealing your things, and they were just disrupting. In this case, the Brits. Okay, guerrilla. That goes back to the Peninsula War. Okay, and basically, guerrilla war means little war. Again, same thing. Popping up where we didn't expect you to be. They're not regular soldiers. They're not necessarily wearing uniforms. It's ambushes and bombs going off. Surprising everyone. So when it jumps up to World War II, the Brits were caught quite flat-footed there in Dunkirk. If you remember that, pretty much the whole of the British Army was on the mainland Europe continent. And when they realized that they were going to be overrun, they had to, in a panic, get out of off of the mainland and back to England. And then, of course, you see the movie Dunkirk. If anybody sees that or anything you read about Dunkirk, it was the great escape of the British Army off of the mainland of Europe. So a lot of the Brit army was wiped out at that time. They had to rebuild, they had to reconstitute, they had to expand greatly in order to counter the threat. And what they wound up with was Churchill wanted people in there, again, popping up where they're not supposed to be, blowing things up, harassing people, and making it generally uncomfortable for the Brits, for the Germans in France. And so with that, the British, they reach back to the Boer War. They come up with the word commando, and they said, we're going to start these commando units, and they're going to do just that. They're going to pop up. And they're going to be harassing behind enemy lines and blowing things up. So the Army Rangers, they turn to the American Army, who headquarters in England at that time, and they say, hey, we're doing these commandos. We're having pretty good success with it. They were mostly feel-good operations, truth be told. It just felt good to get in there and blow some stuff up and kill some of the enemy. While they were rebuilding the main army. And so they asked the Americans to provide commando type units. So the American commander at the time that was tasked with it, he said, well, what a commando, what's that commando units? What are that? And the guys that pop behind enemy lines and blow stuff up. Okay. But they just said, where's the word commando? What's that? And they said, well, that's from the Boer War. They explain it. And the American commander said, well, he turns to his guys. Actually, it was his history staff in over there in Europe. And he says, we need an American term, not this British commando, whatever that is, Boer War thing. So the U.S. Army historians look back and they come up with Robert Rogers and Rogers Rangers. And they say, well, we had this term called Ranger, and they would range behind enemy lines. And they said, great, go with that. We'll be. And then with the Marines, it was pitched. The Marine Raiders came from, oddly enough, it was President Roosevelt's son was a Marine officer at the time. And he actually pitched it directly to the president, who approved it. But the Marine Raiders wound up being the first kind of American commando force, for lack of a better word. But they were also said, well, the Army's starting these Ranger units. And of course, what the Marine commander said, what's a Ranger? I don't know, some guy that would go behind enemy lines back in the day and do raids. So, and then the Marine commander said, "Well, why don't we just call them Raiders?" And that seemed to work for them. So, okay, so World War II SOF units. Okay, again, so the Marine Raider battalions were the first up, and they were going behind enemy lines. They were actually again specially trained. What they were doing was they were coming up in submarines. They bring their rubber Raider boats up onto the deck of the submarine, inflate them, and then the submarine would dive, and the Raiders would paddle their way into Japanese held islands, and they were kind of that first element of American forces that were going behind the lines to surprise, do reconnaissance, and then surprise, ambush, attack, and destroy things. And pretty storied history, and there a lot of different books about that, but ultimately they were, like all of them, they were dissolved. The Rangers, the Army gets the Army Rangers online. Okay, these guys again were very specialized in, particularly the Second Ranger Battalion was specialized for the assault climb at Pointe du Hoc in Normandy during the Normandy invasion. If you look at Pointe du Hoc, it's kind of right in between Omaha and Utah beaches, and it had a gun battery on the end of it, and the guns could aim down the long axis of both beaches, and it's called enfilade fire. It's very dangerous, and so the key task for the invasion force was they wanted those guns knocked out, particularly just to reduce the casualties of the main divisions landing on the assault beaches. So that was what the Second Ranger Battalion trained up for that, and that's pretty great storied history there. Definitely worth a Google search there if you want to learn more about that. The next force I'm going to cover is the Devil's Brigade, the 1st Special Service Force. Pretty interesting unit, joint Canadian and American unit. Pretty good. There's a movie called The Devil's Brigade, and if you look at their arrowhead, the red arrowhead patch, it's actually that's the basis of both the Special Forces Green Beret patch and the U.S. Army Special Operations Command arrowhead patch. And so the 1st Special Service Force, they were more of a commando unit. Their lineage goes, the Green Berets trace their lineage back, for heraldry or whatever, historical purposes. The Green Berets trace their heritage back to the 1st Special Service Force, but they were actually more like a Ranger unit. They were unilateral, all American and Canadian, but all partner. They weren't using indigenous guerrillas, if you will. Okay, so these were strike commando units, but they were the first force that was paratroop, mountaineering, and waterborne amphibious assault troops. So that was the first unit that had all 3 of those disciplines within it. But again, another great historical unit with. There's a ton, and I have some books I recommend on all these guys as well. Okay, the Frogmen, World War II, the UDTs, the Underwater Demolition Unit. Okay, underwater demolition teams. They came out of the NCDUs, the Naval Combat Demolitions Unit. But you can see that guy there. He's swimming down there. He's got no equipment. He's got some explosives, and he's got a K-bar knife on his back. He's on a breath hold. He doesn't look like he even has a snorkel. Okay, these guys were super fit and clearly super brave, and they're working in a very hostile environment. And they go in there and blow those obstacles before the invasion craft would come in there and get punctured by. You see some of those spears sticking up and puncture the landing craft and wind up sinking them. So they're blowing all these obstacles so that the invasion force could get in. I need to speed up a tiny bit, it looks like. Okay, so the Jedburghs, front and center on that picture is Aaron Bank. He's considered the kind of the godfather of the Green Berets, if you will. He was an OSS Jedburgh team. They jumped in behind enemy lines in France, and they would wreak havoc with the French resistance against the Germans and prepare the environment for the invasion of the main armies that were on the way. Couple cool facts. Pat Flynn, our own Pat Flynn, was recruited personally by Aaron Bank in 1951, and actually the official date of the Green Berets organization was 1952. So our Pat Flynn from Lexington and Edith's husband was, I mean, one of the original Green Berets before it was even called, they even knew what they were going to call it. Okay, but that's Aaron Bank front and center. And of note, you'll see that all those men in that picture are wearing German uniforms. That was part of Operation Iron Cross, where they actually they didn't wind up executing it, but they put a mission together to capture Hitler, and Aaron Bank was in charge of that. So some pretty crazy stuff there. The OGs are the basis, the operational groups, the basis of the modern Special Forces A teams. Alamo Scouts, these guys were in the 6th Army area in the Philippines, and they would go deep reconnaissance. Merrill's Marauders, Detachment 101, China, Burma, India. Detachment 101 was worked in Burma, and they were doing deep penetration raids. And that was in Merrill's Marauders. That's kind of the basis of the modern Rangers take their lightning day and night lightning patch from Merrill's Marauders. So the Rangers trace some of their history back to these guys, Detachment 101 of the OSS. So Don Blackburn and Russ Volkman, they were in the Philippines. When the Philippines got overrun by the Japanese, these guys said, "We're not surrendering." They disobeyed orders and they ran into the jungle. From there, they escaped up north, and ultimately, one of them was a lieutenant and one was a major, I think. They wound up commanding multiple corps of forces of guerrillas in the Philippines against the Japanese. So they became these two guys were very critical in the organization of the Green Berets because they were generals by the time they were organizing the Green Berets, and they grabbed Colonel Aaron Bank there to be the first commander of the original Special Forces group, which is numbered the 10th. That was another story. So these two guys were critical in creating what's modern Special Forces. Okay. And then keynote on the bottom there, all these forces were dissolved after the war because, generally speaking, the conventional forces never liked having elites because the elite forces would siphon all the best troops out of the conventional units, and the generals and colonels didn't like that. So oftentimes they'd be dissolving these elites, and then having to rebuild them every time a war breaks out. So skipping over Korea, there's a lot to go over there, but again, for purposes of time, okay, Special Forces gets a great ally in President Kennedy, where he likes the guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare. He doesn't want to have divisions of 19-year-olds being machine gunned on beaches anymore. He'd rather have a small team of advisors getting locals to kind of take care of some of these problems. And that's where the Green Berets are in. It becomes official. That's a picture of General Yarborough there with President Kennedy. The headgear of the actual Green Beret is adopted as a result of this meeting right here. And it's the only headgear in the military that exists by presidential order. So at any rate, most of the generals thought it was too European looking. They didn't like it. So the Green Berets would often wear that hat, kind of illegally, if you will. So the UDTs, the underwater demolition teams, the frogmen, they add air and land to their skills, and that's where the acronym Sea, Air, Land Commandos, SEAL, comes from. Okay, so this is where SEALs and Green Berets are getting a lot of funding at this point, just prior to our large involvement in Vietnam. That's Roy Boehm's book there, First SEAL. Pretty interesting, using the Bay of Pigs invasion. And then from OSS to Green Berets, that's Colonel Aaron Bank. Again, considered the father of the modern Green Berets. Okay. Vietnam. Let me see. Just checking my time here. 2:00. Okay, so Vietnam. Okay, SOF has a coming of age. Special Operations Forces. This we have SFA teams all over the Central Highlands. Again, weaponizing indigenous combat power, training those Nung and Hmong tribesmen, and getting with those tribes and creating battalions out of them, out of farmers and whatnot, and leveraging those battalions against North Korean troops and of course Viet Cong. The Mike forces and Hatchet forces, these were like mobile SWAT teams. Again, everything with SF had indigenous forces with it. Okay, I think I have a picture there. That's Franklin Miller on the top right. He's with the SOG Recon team, and Franklin Miller top right is a Medal of Honor recipient. His book is Reflections of a Warrior. Very, very Great book. But you see again around the green. So there's 2 Green Berets in that picture, and the rest of them are indigenous forces. This is kind of the Green Beret way of warfare. Is working with locals. Conversely, that's a picture of a SEAL platoon. There are 4, I think, Vietnamese in that picture, surrounded by 14 or so SEALs, and that's more their comfort zone. They don't necessarily. Most of my SEAL buddies prefer to work with their organic SEAL platoons versus 100 or so, whatever it is, whatever the mission calls for, of indigenous forces. And they're very, I think they're very good at that kind of unilateral, or they're very good at what they do, but and we're very good at what we do. But our main thing is working with a lot of those local forces. I'll get more into that in a minute. Another picture of the SEALs. This is a Force Recon team. Bruce Norton is front center. He's a Navy corpsman on that team, and he wrote the book Force Recon Diary. Very, very good book about those guys. They're doing deep reconnaissance inside of Vietnam, whereas the SOG teams are going actually across the border into the covert stuff. That is Bob Howard, only American ever to have been nominated for the Medal of Honor 3 times, and they talk a lot about him in this book here, SOG, and that's the history of SOG is the Studies and Observations Group. Originally, it was called the Special Operations Group, but that was too obvious what they were doing, so they gave it the term Studies and Observations Group to make it. What the hell does that even do anyway? So they're trying to give it a vague name that nobody knew what they're up to. But those were mostly Green Berets, but there were SEALs and Force Recon Marines also, and Air Force Commandos assigned to SOG during the Vietnam War. I mentioned the LRPs and Rangers at the bottom. The LRPs are the long range reconnaissance patrols from the conventional divisions, and they kind of carried the Ranger torch, if you will. They were the Rangers of the Vietnam War, but they weren't doing what our current Rangers do now as a strike force. They were, again, deep reconnaissance for the conventional force. Okay, post-Vietnam, the 70s, the rise of terrorism. Special forces is downsized and even marginalized to a great extent. Of note is Detachment A in Berlin, which was the Berlin Brigade, and they stayed as a clandestine, unconventional warfare unit, working counter to the East Berlin, intelligence operatives, if you will. The Ranger battalions are back, now reconstituted by General Creighton Abrams. He was the commander in Vietnam. Creighton Abrams becomes the chief of staff of the Army. He did not have a good experience with special forces in Vietnam. He thought they were kind of too embedded with the CIA. He didn't have a lot of control over some of the things they were doing. And some of the guys did have some pretty high profile, newsworthy, kind of events where he kind of thought they were kind of rogues and they're off doing things that, he didn't approve of. So he creates these Ranger battalions. He creates 2 of them. He says, these are going to be the most elite troops there are. They're going to be perfect soldiers. Their boots, their hats, their haircuts, every piece of gear on them, they're going to be the ultimate soldiers. And that's what in a conventional force, if you will. Green Berets, of course, unconventional, right? But he wanted these perfect conventional soldiers, and they are. They're exceptional. But with that comes the Special Missions Unit, originally Delta Force. Okay, so the Delta Force, Charlie Beckwith, Green Beret, Vietnam. He had served with the British SAS, the Special Air Service, the British Commandos, and they kind of, Charlie Beckwith says, hey, we don't really have a SAS type capability within Special Forces, or within the American military. So that's where he lobbied for it for a number of years. Ultimately, he gets the approval to create Delta Force YD, Delta. Charlie Beckwith commanded Project Delta in Vietnam, which was a deep reconnaissance unit. But also, Special Forces had A teams, B teams, and C teams. So that's where the letter D came from. Delta, D is in Delta, and that's where that kind of name came from. But that was going to become the new Army Special Mission Unit that could do things unilaterally, surgical strike, not from an infantry ranger standpoint, but actually even more precise, the hostage rescue, the most presidential directed top missions. And so that's where Delta Force comes from. Just as they come online, you wind up with the Iran hostage rescue situation. So unconventional warfare, if you will, working through and with indigenous forces is kind of marginalized, and even people are over that. Okay, so unconventional warfare is out. Unilateral direct action is the new cool thing in town. Okay, so that's what everybody starts. A lot of special operations forces just start honing in on unilateral direct action capabilities. Okay, Desert One. This is the crash site of what wound up being Delta Force's first mission. Just as soon as they're coming online as an organization, they get tasked with this mission, to the point where even their recruit class had a piece of this mission. Okay, so they weren't even they didn't have all of their squadrons operational yet, and they were even taking their recruit class to take a smaller piece of the objective. So 1980, I think most people probably have heard of this. The Iran, okay, they had, I think it was 444 days. They had something like 53 hostages had to get rescued out of the embassy during the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The Shah is out, the Ayatollah is in, and they have our hostages. So what wound up happening with that was they had an ad hoc force, and you can't do that with this level of a mission. They didn't have the best helicopters going in there. Okay, and so they wind up several of the helicopters. They send 10. They know they need 6. The mission cannot be completed without 6. By the time they get to Desert One, which was just a refueling point, they're going to go there for Desert Two, which was a hideout location with the helicopters in a big valley, and then the following night into the target. They wind up not having enough helicopters to complete the mission. They're not even at Desert Two, so they're not even at the spot where there's a lot of more things that need to happen to even. So the commander on the ground says, "We don't have what we need. We need to shut this down, sneak back out of here, recock this thing, and come in and do it right." And so the mission is decided to be aborted. What winds up happening is the helicopter crashes into the refueling plane. 8 Americans are killed, 4 significantly injured, and the whole force just has to get on the planes and get out of the country, abandoning all the helicopters. And that was that. That was the. But from that comes the Goldwater-Nichols Act, 1986, National Defense Authorization Act, and this creates the Joint Special Operations Command, 2-star command at the time. This brings SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force and pretty much whatever else they ask for under this new command. Shortly after that comes U.S. Special Operations Command. That's a 4-star command. That creates the TSOCs. That's the Theater Special Operations Commands. That's all over the world. The world's broken up into different theaters of operations. You got a Marine, you got a 4-star in that theater, and then you have a 2-star from the Navy, 2-star, from each branch. Well, they added the TSOC, the Theater Special Operations Command, the 2-star to that geographic combatant commander. So now he has a Marine, if you're the 4-star, you got a Marine 2-star, Navy 2-star. Now you got a Special Ops 2-star as well. And that kind of coordinate that. Most importantly, the ASD SOLIC, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. That's a mouthful. ASD SOLIC becomes our civilian oversight, which is a big deal. To have if you will, like a secretary, right? You got a Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy. Well, this guy kind of becomes our Secretary of Special Operations. And he's actually not a full secretary. As you can see, he is an assistant secretary. So it's a rung down, but nonetheless, good for us. That's Goldwater and Nichols. That's the Joint Special Operations Command. And there's the Pentagon, where we now have a civilian oversight, ASD SOLIC, looking out specifically for special ops troops. Now you can't have a general come in who doesn't like them and decides not to fund them. Okay, U.S. Special Operations Command, there's our 4 logos: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Joint. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Naval Special Warfare. How am I looking on time? Got to speed up still. Okay, Naval Special Warfare. NSW. Okay, you got the SEAL teams, which of course everyone's heard of the SEAL teams, but you also have the SEAL delivery vehicle teams with the mini subs. These guys are doing some very important work, and actually, there's no other people on Earth that can do what they do. It's a pretty unique force. Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewmen. These are our small boat operators, and these guys are also highly trained and very good at what, and actually the best at what they do. Okay. It seems simple. What do? They drive a boat. No, trust me, these are some very specialized people. NSWEOD, that's the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Techs. These guys in the Navy fall under Naval Special Warfare. And even in the Army, we usually wind up using Naval EOD guys. SEAL Team 6, Dev Group, okay, that's their JSOC. That's their Tier 1. That's their Super SEALs, if you will, okay? And there's Senior Chief Byers receiving the Medal of Honor after a hostage rescue operation that, of course, he had to distinguish himself in extreme circumstances. By Water Beneath the Walls, that's the book I recommend it's the rise of the Navy SEALs. Kind of just explains why are there SEALs? If we needed to do something on land, why didn't some Marine little unit or an Army Ranger unit or something do it? And it was because the Army and Marines kept dissolving their special ops units, and the Navy started using their frogmen to do it. And that's when they said, all right, let's actually make this a real thing. And they create the SEALs. And then they're not dependent upon a Marine commander or an Army commander to provide forces for whatever that job is. Air Force combat controllers, pararescuemen, these guys are all highly trained. Combat controllers control airfields, they can control aircraft, and they're usually attached to all special ops teams. These guys usually get farmed out. You'll have a Green Beret team, and you'll have one Air Force guy on it. Pararescuemen, very specialized rescue technicians, medics, trained in everything. The AC-130s, that's the attack cargo planes, and they got very precision fires on these things. So they're unbelievable. Okay, there's some guys being decorated there. Okay, again, these guys are trained in everything that every other special ops outfit is trained in, and they can go in with anybody attached to the SEALs. They can attach to the Green Berets, attach to the Rangers. It doesn't matter. Pretty good guys. All right, and then their JSOC detachment is called the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. Army Special Ops. Okay, so you got the Green Berets, right? These are our guerrilla warfare guys. You got the 75th Rangers. These are our surgical strike kind of infantry commandos. You got the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. You got the Psychological Operations Group, the Civil Affairs Group, and you've got the Special Missions units assigned to JSOC. Okay, so there's several of those. I think we kind of covered Green Berets and Rangers and Delta Force. So, but additionally, we also have some very specialized aircraft, helicopters, and again, the PSYOPs and civil affairs people. Again, you see pictures of Green Berets. Who's near them? Indigenous troops. Green Berets, Indigenous troops. Rangers. Who's near them? Other Rangers. Okay. Rangers sneaking into a target there. You got some special operations aircraft, the 160th UH-60 and CH-47. And then beyond that's a World War II plane. But that's the picture I found. They're usually distinct by those refueling booms that stick out of the front of them. That's how you can tell the special ops ones. That's the Little Bird. That's a kind of surgical strike aircraft that they can carry weapons or troops and kind of put them right on the roof of a building or wherever they need to go, on a boat, you name it. Okay, unconventional warfare is back. Okay, 9/11 attacks. This book, Guerrilla Factory, kind of breaks down this officer that wrote this book. He kind of he talks about the how at SOCOM everybody was so focused on direct action capabilities. Unconventional warfare was kind of like considered to be antiquated. When Afghanistan kicks off, what do we have? Guerrilla tribes that need what? Advisors that can guide them. And so we wind up flooding the place with, well, actually, it was about 100 Green Berets that took over Afghanistan. And to the chagrin of many, a lot of the surgical strike forces, they really didn't have intelligence on good targets. Some of them did attack a couple of targets that were known to be empty before they even went there, but it's more of a show of force. But of course, eventually in the global war on terrorism, direct action campaigning, industrial counterterrorism becomes quite a thing, and JSOC really kind of reinvents itself. A couple of these books, so Guerrilla Factory, Horse Soldiers, Relentless Strike. I mean, this book probably should have never been written. There's so much secret stuff in there, but it's out there, so I guess you can read it. It's kind of insane what's in that book. Okay, Marine Corps Special Operations Command there. About 2006, MARSOC Detachment 1 is formed from the old Force Recon units, and they get attached to Special Operations Command. Nowadays, they've got the Marine Raider Regiment with 3 battalions, and they're out there every place everybody else is doing all the same things. Okay, they're just as trained, and they're and fun fact, shows the sniper guy there. I was the first Green Beret ever to graduate from the Marine Raiders uh, Marine Special Operations Advanced Sniper course called MASC. But yeah, the Marine Raiders, the Raider Regiment is a full member of Special Operations Command, and like I said, as capable and just as good as all the rest of the units assigned. Okay, global war on terrorism. What was SOF up to? Okay, we're all over the place, kind of everywhere, in varying levels of engagement, but mostly working with host nation commandos, SWAT teams, things like that, and helping them, in their counterterrorism fights. And that's where we have a lot of great relationships with a lot of the indigenous forces from the elite indigenous forces from the various countries that we work in. The village stability operations is noteworthy. That's where the embedded special forces A teams, just like they had done in Vietnam, and they actually live in a village, work with those villagers, and that was in Afghanistan countering Taliban control. Okay, but we again offensive partnered counterterrorism, and then through and with becomes the way, like working through and with indigenous forces. Even the elite, unilateral strike forces wind up working with partner forces during the global war on terrorism in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and beyond. Okay, the current operational environment, there's 5 domains of warfare: air, sea, and land. You see the SEAL acronym: Sea, Air, Land. The Special Forces patch has 3 lightning bolts on it. What's it stand for? Sea, air, and land. Okay, and so, but now we've added space and cyber to that. So we're in kind of a different operational environment. The great power competition, okay, strategic clandestine subversion. These are the Russians invading Ukraine. We've got China projecting influence throughout the world, and both of those countries looking to counter and reduce our kind of hold on things. North Korea, all this stuff. There's Soleimani is on that picture. This the Iranians, the IRGC. You see all the trouble we're having right now. This is ISIS. We got Al Qaeda, Al Shabaab. It goes on and on. There's a violent extremist organizations, the VEOs. Okay, you got the OCEs, the organized criminal enterprises. That's El Chapo Guzman down there in Mexico. Okay, so we've got a lot of mercenary commando organizations out there. There's kind of been like a proliferation of special operations capabilities into mercenary forces. We've got counter-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and we've got our forces out there shaping things from the shadows. I put World War C in information operations. World War C is cyber. Okay, it's a term I made up. It's not a real thing, but I always say people are on the lookout for World War III, but we're in the middle of World War C, right? There's a cyber world war, and it's using clandestine subversion, and I even make the example of fentanyl. In Vietnam we lost 10,000 people, 58,000 people over 10 years, and that was a tragedy. We lose a Vietnam and a half equivalent every single 12-month period just to fentanyl overdoses, and all that fentanyl was originally coming from China, and now it's coming from Mexico, but still Chinese campaign of subversion against our country. And again, it's clandestine because on the surface it just looks like a drug habit, but it's more than just a drug habit. When it's flooded in, it's being flooded into our country. It's super readily available everywhere, and it's very cheap. Okay, so a lot of things happening in the current operational environment. That's the Los Zetas gang there, and that's a cartel down in Mexico, originally formed from Mexican special forces. That's a cyber picture. Okay, future operational environment. Okay, Cold War II. All right, I got some space laser picture guys there, but the adversaries will seek to minimize strategic risk, so they're not going to want to fight us toe to toe. If I'm going to get in a fight with a boxer, I probably shouldn't box him. Just a fun tip, right? And so same thing. The Chinese put an aircraft carrier in the water. The Chinese do not want to fight our aircraft carriers. They could hurt us a little bit, but it probably wouldn't work out for them and their navy would probably be at the bottom of the ocean when we were done sparring. So, but they're using other ways to get to us, and still making it seem feasible that they could fight us toe to toe if need be, but that's not their intent. So they're minimizing risk. They're working in spaces where we're not so good, like cyber, right? We're not as dominant in the cyber domain as we are in, say, the air domain or the land domain. Okay, so a lot of their activities remaining clandestine and covert, strategic subversion, weaponizing chaos. Okay, plausible and implausible deniability. I take the example: the Russians shoot down a jumbo jet with some missile that can, and they turn to the Russians, to Putin. They say, well, you guys shot down that jet, civilian airliner. He says, no, it wasn't us. They said, well, nobody else could have done it. He said, I don't know what to tell you. It wasn't us. I mean, it's like implausible deniability, but that's where we're at. We're just denying things that, all right. Thucydides' trap. If you read Graham Allison, he talks about Thucydides' trap. Thucydides wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War. Talks about how Athens and Sparta did not want to go to war together against each other, but kind of like they had the one emerging power. And where are they emerging into? Into the space of the sitting power. Okay, so on the fringes there, it becomes a problem. Think about Ukraine, think about Taiwan, things like that. So on the fringes, if you're an emerging power, you're going to have to emerge into a space that perhaps we already control. So though both superpowers at the time in the Peloponnesian War did not want to go to war together, it became unavoidable. So Graham Allison proposed the concept of, hey, is war between America and China unavoidable? And that's the Thucydides trap that he proposes. So it's something to look at and read. AI, quantum computing, bio-ops. I'm not an expert at any of those, but I think about bio-ops. China's right now got an inverted demographic where one-child policy for 40 years. And now they have They have an entire group of people getting ready to retire with not enough workers coming up behind them to support their retirement. So they kind of have a upside down demographic there, which is going to be a strategic threat to them. And then, I don't know, magically a disease comes out that seems to kill old people really quickly. I don't know. Was that? I don't know. What, food for thought. Okay. But again, in the future operating environment, I see special operations forces remaining as the go-to force, because a lot of times working below that threshold of full-scale warfare. Right? You can kind of work in the shadows there. All right. I also say don't forget about these guys. All right. Insurgents consistently demonstrate the ability to humble great powers. If money and technology and brain power was what wins wars, then we would be undefeated. Right. But consistently, these people with the iron will to just continue resisting manage to humble great powers with what? Some AK-47s and flip-flops and in an indomitable spirit to fight for what it is that they believe in. So do not discount the guerrilla. Okay, so guerrilla warfare is continuous; it's always happening, and terrorist tactics and all that are always the resort of the weak against the strong, and so that you're always going to have that. It's not going anywhere. Max Boot, Invisible Armies, great book. It's like a Bible. It's got to be 1,000 pages in it, but it's the epic history of guerrilla warfare. And he explains how we are awesome at unusual warfare, which is full-scale conventional, but yet we're not that awesome at normal warfare, which is the type of warfare that's always happening, and that's guerrilla warfare. Because why? Most people don't have a tank division handy, but they got an AK-47 and they got a will to try to fight for what they believe in. Okay, greatest threats to the homeland, in my personal opinion, the most dangerous threats to our homeland is teaching our youth that what we have here is inherently bad, racist, and not worth defending. That is not true. And I'd be happy to argue that with anybody. What we have here is special, and it is worth fighting for. I have up there the most dangerous operational environment in history. I truly believe that. Okay, but I think teaching these youth that the Army's having a hard time recruiting right now, and that's because we're teaching all the kids that this isn't worth defending, and and all that. So I think that's our greatest strategic threat. And then the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party subversion of our country, and then of course the cartels and weaponized migration, I see as major strategic threats. Okay, and then these two documents. This is why I think we'll be all right. I think a lot of the people, the immigrants that come here, love this country. I'm a second generation American, Irish, and so these immigrants that are coming here, they're gonna love this country, and they're gonna protect it, and they're gonna fight for it. And even though there's a lot of infighting and whatever crap going on right now, I think we're going to be all right as a country. And I think because our product is liberty, and that's real, and the other guy's product, communism, it can only exist if you have an extensive network of concentration camps where you can exterminate other ideas. So with that said, thank you. And thank you to any of our veterans from all generations that have logged in to check out the presentation.
Okay, we have a whole bunch of people on the screen here. And folks, anybody who wishes to reveal your identity, feel free to, turn on your video if you would like to, because this is going to be a folksy little session here. And we have just had a week's worth of lectures in 1 hour. And so my advice to everybody is take a deep breath, sit back.
Yep.
If you have pencil and paper, think for a moment or so about everything that you've seen and heard, and then decide where you would like to begin to ask Greg a question. The field is now open for questions. You can either ask your question in the chat line. We've got one. We've got a couple there now, which I will read to Greg. Or if you turn on your video, you can always raise your hand, and we will see you and recognize you that way. Okay, so Greg, Frances would like to know, she says, thank you for your presentation. Would you explain what you mean by weaponized migration?
Okay, yeah. So weaponized migration, great question. So I'm going to bring us back to the Syria war. What we had there was, so you've got the Americans were behind guerrilla forces that were working in Syria. The Bashir Assad regime was kind of the tyrannical, dictator that was running the place. ISIS blows up the whole area, right? And so now ISIS, another enemy of ours, takes over that area. So we wind up working with guerrillas to topple ISIS and kind of create some what we call white space on the map and push those enemy insurgent forces out of that area. So there's really like 3 wars going on there, and then the Bashir Assad regime. So Vladimir Putin comes in. And because they're old drinking buddies and they're best friends? No, Putin doesn't care about Syria. But what he saw was an opportunity there. So he goes in and he links up with the Assad regime, and he gets on their side. So we're on the side of a guerrilla group that's in there, and then we both have a mutual enemy in ISIS, but we kind of have a mutual enemy in the Assad regime. Okay, so what winds up happening is, backing up the Assad regime, Putin comes in, he's bombing the hell out of these population centers, and he's creating mass migration into Europe. Now, go back a few years to the time period we're talking about this, 2017, 2018, and you have he starts bombing these populations. That millions of refugees are now flooding into Europe. Now, if I'm Vladimir Putin, what's Europe? It's NATO. What's NATO? It's the counter-Russian conglomerate, right? So he wants to reassert himself as a global player. He wants to reclaim some of the old Soviet Union, and he wants to destabilize Europe, which is ultimately NATO. So at that time, all the guns were facing out of NATO. When all this weaponized migration came in, okay, again, you think of warfare as tanks and planes, right? Well, that's how von Clausewitz thinks of warfare, but Sun Tzu doesn't think of warfare like that. Sun Tzu uses weaponized migration and all the manner of trickery. So this weaponized migration, millions of refugees flood into Europe, into Paris, into all over. Okay, Germany, right? Angela Merkel took. I don't remember what the number was, but it was in a couple million. I'm not even sure. Okay, and they kind of rewrote. If you watch that demographic for 30 years in Germany, they kind of rewrote the German DNA 30 years from now. It's probably not going to be a majority German Christian country in 30 years. Now again, I'm kind of off the top of my head, and somebody might nail me down on some very specific that, but I think you see where I'm going with it. So
Yeah,
the weaponized migration
I'm
into Europe.
here.
Yeah,
Too,
sorry. Yeah.
Because what I would rather not have happen is to have you vary too much into the realm of personal opinion and kind of just stick to as many facts as you can. Okay, because that gets a little dicey.
Okay. But with the weaponized migration into Europe worked so well to undermine some of the NATO powers that they said, we got to get down to that southern border and weaponize some migration there. And I think they've just helped foment things that are already there. They've helped foment problems, and that's the clandestine subversion that is happening in our country and elsewhere. Does that answer your question on weaponized migration?
I don't know, Francis. You can speak, Francis, if you want to. If you want to unmute yourself.
I see it up there. It says thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Right
Good.
on. Thank you, Francis.
All right. Hang on, please. Oh, yeah. She said yes. Thank you. All right. Okay. How about another question, folks?
Linda, I have one. This is Jim. Most of the photographs that Greg showed us were mostly, I think, entirely men in special forces. I'm just interested, what's the role of women, Greg, in special forces these days? And could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the women are allowed to screen for any element of the Defense Department, and so and there are women in every single special operations unit. Now, what their roles are in the units vary, depend on that person's skill set and what the unit needs. So they may, and in most cases, they're not qualified operators, but of note, there have been several females that went through the full training pipelines in special forces and in the Rangers that did serve honorably in the force. Generally speaking, there's less women that want to apply for this type of duty, so that's the reality. And then of course they don't alter the standards at all. And generally speaking, women are smaller than men. And keeping in mind, like the men that are screening for these units tend to be, the fittest and kind of, toughest among a male group. And so, so you don't have a lot of women that are kind of kicking the doors in to try to get in these units. But there are women in various roles. Again, so that's for the operator, kind of the special operator themselves. But there's a ton of other roles within the special operations community that a lot of women play critical roles in. So they're there. They're our partners, and they're there, and they're our teammates.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Dan, you've turned on your video. Does that mean
hey, Greg,
ask a question?
Hey, Dan.
Yeah, hi, Greg. Yeah, this is Dan, an alumni of ODA 945, a few years before you. Just wanted to tell you, great job.
Right on. Oh, great.
You,
Did you see the whole presentation, Dan?
yeah, I was kind of driving
Oh,
at the
good.
Same time, but yeah, it was
Oh, good. All
good
right, good.
presentation. Congratulations. Yeah.
So, Dan, tell us a
Excellent.
little about your background.
Let's see. I joined Special Forces coming on off the street in 1977
Yeah.
and retired out of Greg's group in 2003 and held a job at Natick Labs for the last 20 plus years working parachute systems for Special Forces.
That's excellent.
So I got
Oh, so
45
so
years
so
of
so so Dan, you were working Natick Labs, you said?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right. So I haven't met you, but I've heard of you my entire career, just FYI.
Oh, okay.
Really?
So now I finally have a face that I can put to
How do you like that?
no, well, I always knew that we had one of our guys up there at Natick Labs running the parachute research and development and testing and all that. And so that's Dan.
Yeah, I retired. I retired in March, so I'm out of the game.
Right on. Right on.
So, Greg
Well,
was
thanks for everything you've
deployed.
done, Dan.
He was deployed to Africa, South America, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Balkans. Can you
Yep.
top that?
Oh, absolutely not.
You
I
in those
spent
same
my
places?
I spent my entire career, my active duty career, never left the States. Back in 77 to 81, we did training missions to different countries around the world, Norway, because I essentially out of 25 years, I spent all 25 years on just three teams, 11th group, 20th group, and then 19th group. Oh, sorry, 5th group, 11th group, and 19th group, and just a short period of time in 20th. I deployed to Haiti and I deployed to Kuwait just after 9/11.
Excellent.
Oh, we're so
And
glad you're
and then
here.
and then and then Linda, I just want to qualify that.
Yes.
I mean, some of my teammates and some of Dan and I's friends, I mean, have got 20 deployments, and I'm not even kidding. I
Right.
like actually 20.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, we've got guys that have gone over. I've got a handful of combat tours. Uh, I've got teammates that they've been going overseas every single year for 20 years. And a lot of them, they're working with the intelligence community for their like I'm a fireman. They're working in the intelligence community going overseas, and they're jumping on and going overseas with our unit. I mean, some of these guys have, I couldn't even stand in their shadow.
yeah.
So I
And
just
that
want to
being said,
qualify that.
yeah, and that being said, it's hard to hold down a job, hard to hold down a family when you
Yep,
deploy that often. It's a
there's no
tough
doubt.
lifestyle.
It's
Well,
the
let me
toughest thing
mention
always to depart from your family. Yeah.
from conversations with Greg, after 27 years, he
Yep.
only left because he had to, because he got injured in a parachuting
Yeah.
accident. You'd still
That's
be
right.
there, Greg. You'd still be going on deployments, right?
In all likelihood, yeah. I mean, my bosses at the time were trying to, set me up for, to continue service, and it would have been a privilege and an honor to do so. But I'm also a person of deep faith, and I think things happens for a reason. And I always say, like, I'm fighting forward from whatever foxhole I'm in. I don't spend a lot of time in the rearview mirror. I'm moving out and to the next objective. And so when I did get hurt, I said I just owned it. Okay, here we go. It's fine. Like I miss the guys. I'm still in constant contact with all my teammates, but I think it was time. And I would say God has a plan and it's better than mine. So that's what I go with.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the life that you developed, the nonprofit, particularly that you developed after you retired? Is it the Massachusetts Fallen
Well,
Hero
Mass Fallen Heroes, yeah. So we
Memorial
actually
Fund? You
started that.
talked about it briefly, but tell everybody more about it, because that's really what occupies most of your waking hours now, right? I mean, you're,
Um,
well, a lot, but
I
you're very
I'm
devoted.
spread. Yeah, I've got a lot of things going on, and among those are Mass Fallen Heroes and InnoVets. Okay, so Mass Fallen Heroes was started in 2010 by a group of us veterans and military guys, Gold Star family members, and in a nutshell, we were asked to help fundraise for another initiative that wound up going, they kind of collapsed under their own weight or whatever happened with them. And we kind of said, well, why don't we keep going with this? And then so that we come up with the name Mass Fallen Heroes, and we started fundraising, and it wound up being way, way, way more work than we could have ever imagined. And it became another full-time job that you don't get paid for, Eventually we did go with a paid staff, and everything started. It's no wonder why companies pay their people, right? So once we got a paid staff, things started getting under control. But at that rate, again, we kind of evolved over a little bit of time there. But what we have is, honor, support, and empower, like I said. So we built a memorial down in the Seaport District. The dirt alone that we're on, people, it's worth millions. I mean, people are like, how did you get this piece of land without, like, taking hostages? And so but we used our kind of connections and our relationships to try to, and political weight to try to get the help we needed, and some people got us into the right place. So we got a nice piece of land down there in the Seaport. It's beautiful. We have a memorial that's out in the park there, and it's a 50-foot obelisk tower, and it's got some glass panels with the names on it. But really, the coolest parts of the memorial are yet to be built. They were going to be building a building right next to it. And in that building, we're going to have a room with the interactive type memorial, more the computerized, video interviews and things like that. So that building's now off the table, and we're going to wind up building kind of a standalone memorial room. And they're going to expand that park, and this room will be in the park there. And so that's the honor component. Support. We're working on, supporting Gold Star families, various programs and services. We kind of unionized the families, if you will, because they were all so geographically spread out. Unlike in previous wars where you had so many casualties that, there would be neighbors that also lost a loved one. So in this war, the vets are very spread out, and the Gold Star families, of course, are even more spread out. So by creating a little Gold Star community, we're able to bring them in, and we run several programs a year, to, Christmas dinners and trips if they want to go somewhere. We do a hunting thing. And so we kind of work with whoever's participating with us and see what they want to do, and we try to fund it. And then the empower component, that's working with veterans. One piece of the InnoVets program, which is a subordinate program under Mass Fallen Heroes. It's really looks like it's becoming the bigger brother in the initiative. And the InnoVets program, we have another thing that I do for a living is cybersecurity. And so my cybersecurity company, Blue Mantis, is helping us build out a training program that brings veterans, including Kevin Powers, also from Boston College Law. He created their cybersecurity program and is a Navy veteran. And so, we're building a training program. We don't have it done yet, but build that training program where veterans and Gold Star family members can get some initial basic training, if you will, in the cybersecurity disciplines, and then introduction into good paying jobs in the cybersecurity industry, where, again, like I said, we're in World War C right now. Okay. We have 1.5 million jobs available in the cyber domain inside the United States. And all these private sector companies are protecting the American economy, which is the basis of American national power. And they're doing it one company at a time. So I look at the cybersecurity industry as an extension of national security. And it's been good because, again, I came from, if you will, more of like the physical security domain as a soldier, but recognizing the importance of cybersecurity, but never having any training really in it. Now that the more I get involved in it, the more I relate it to national security. So anyways, so that's what we're doing with Mass Fallen Heroes and InnoVets. And the intent is to get the organization funded to where it's just funded, and it can exist when we're all dead. So they'll still be here people looking after Gold Star families and for the next war or whatever, so
Well, that's
and
important. We
veterans.
want it to go on long after we're gone.
Yeah, that's the intent.
Well, that's great. I just thought it would be good if we all knew a little bit more about what you were involved in.
Yep.
Because
And you can follow it. They're on.
wild.
I'm not on any social media, but Mass Fallen Heroes is, and InnoVets is, and you can find everything about it. There's videos and interviews and everything.
Okay. So, folks, don't be shy. If anybody has a question, you just turn your video on so we can see who you are, and you can just ask the question yourself. You don't have to type it in the chat.
Yeah, you can type it in, or just pop on there.
Just
and
turn your
anything on
video
anything
on
in the
and tell us who you
presentation,
are. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, I have a quick question for you. Something that intrigued me is the strategy of the special forces to be there way before the emergency happens, so that you've already got the boots on the ground. You've already been developing the relationships with the indigenous people.
Exactly.
So that you've got a head start, which means that you've got people all across the globe in a whole lot of places, right?
That's correct. That's right. Yep. So we've got guys everywhere. Wherever there is, any type of people in need of support that have, they're in the kind of, if you will, the American orbit, or that we would prefer that they be in the American orbit. So we try to go out there and project American kind of influence, if we say shaping things from the shadows, if you will, instead of going in there and just with a Marine division and stomping our way in there and making it happen. You just kind of, you just add a little weight to the scale, and you say, hey, this is what our commanders are telling us that we're looking to have as an end state here, or as a next phase of whatever it is going on. And North Africa is a great example. There's a lot of terrorist activity and violent extremist organizations activity in some of these fledgling countries. They're kind of, maybe fledgling, but is not the word, but they're kind of teetering on going into an abyss of instability, which would create far more complex problems for the region, everybody around them, and of course the United States. So if we can get into some of these countries and help prop them up before some type of collapse happens, I mean, we can avert wars. We can prevent wars. And I think that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing all over the place. We got guys in the Philippines. We got guys in North Africa fighting against Al-Shabaab. And again, when I say fighting, some of my troops just recently came back from that. They're not necessarily our guys directly engaged, but they're helping facilitate and helping resource and helping plan with some of these indigenous government troops to help them keep what they have going afloat, and hopefully get them into a better place where they can protect themselves.
And of course, these countries have all invited the special forces in.
That's right. Yep. Very much so. And then those teams that are in those remote countries there, they're working with the embassy teams and the military attachés and the ambassadors and things like that to again, with a whole of kind of government approach to kind of moving things in the direction of America's desired end state for that region, So it's we're just a component of a larger initiative in most of those places.
Yeah,
trust me, they love it. They love it when those host nation forces, when they get a Green Beret team or a SEAL platoon in there. I mean, they love it because they know, hey, we got Americans. Trust me, it's a big deal to walk in somewhere and have an American flag on your sleeve. Not that we wear uniforms all the time, but they know we're Americans, and that's a big deal. And especially to have American special forces or special operations forces, that props a lot of people up quite a bit. And we established great friendships with some of these people.
Okay. Jim Ramsey, did you have a comment you wanted to say?
Well, yes, I just was curious, thinking about China and Russia. I assume that they also have special operations forces,
They do indeed.
or do they
Yeah.
have the same type of organization that we do?
Most of them try to mimic what the U.S. Special Operations Command is. It's kind of damn near impossible. I would say, like, with all these different countries, you go into countries and you have varying levels of education, but you don't have necessarily varying levels of intelligence. And so you've got smart people. Maybe they didn't get a degree from name a college, but they're very intelligent. They know how to get things done. And so a lot of these foreign troops, though less resourced and not as well trained because they don't have the facilities and money and ammunition to train with, so they're not going to be as well trained, but they're just as committed. They're just as brave. They'll fight to the last, and so they're all very, not all, but they all have very impressive characters within their country there, and I'm even talking about some of our allies, and European allies and so forth, and so, but you can't quite replicate U.S. Special Operations Command. It's got a annual budget that is to the tune of about $15 billion. I mean, that just the Special Ops Forces budget exceeds probably most countries' military budgets. I mean, England, I think U.S. Special Operations Command has a bigger annual budget than the British Defense Ministry of Defense. I might be wrong, but it's not by much. And so when you're leveraging that much character and talent and education and training, it's hard to replicate that. But again, down to the individual, there a lot of these forces have great people in there. But back to the Russia and China, they probably have great people in there that are committed to their country and whatever it is that they stand for. But I don't think they have the capabilities of U.S. Special Operations Command. I don't think they could afford to have the capabilities of U.S. Special Operations Command. They have the commitment, they have the dedication, they don't have the capabilities. But they do have forces. Yeah, but they do have forces all over the place projecting their country's influence. Okay, and they could be intelligence forces or military forces, or just like we do, a combination of the two. And so they're right here in our country. They just broke up a Chinese police station in New York City. Okay, that was national news. Okay, they have operatives in our country actively working in a clandestine way to subvert our society, and that's where you see all the division within our country. It's just fomented externally. There's a lot to that, and I'll be careful what I say, but most of the division in our country that we see right now is externally fomented. And so we talk about even racism in our country, right? Well, there's racism everywhere, but against all people, by the way, and everyone's been enslaved. The Irish have been enslaved. But the point being, this is the best that there is out there. So it's, however, I talk about America, however terrible it is, there's nothing anywhere in the history of the two-legged ground ape better than this. So I mean, so I don't know.
Here.
People are complaining. Yeah. That's what I say about the immigrants come here. They're not complaining. They laugh. They say racism is when you call someone a name in this country. Oh my God, that's absurd. In my country, they slaughter the other tribe. And that goes back, and that's all countries. You can read about the War of Eight Saints and the 30 Years War. I mean, it was savage warfare, exterminating other tribes because they believed a little bit differently, or they lit the candles at a different time during the service or whatever. So it's the history of man is warfare, and guerrilla warfare is the method. And So yeah, we have, but back to your question, sorry. Yeah, they have their special operations forces. Yes, they are everywhere, including right here.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you again for giving us, like I said, a week's worth of lectures in 1 hour. And I know I'm going to quote
a lot in there.
Audience members. Mike Levitt just wrote in the chat, and I think this is a very good closing quote. He just said, "Thank you for your service and a great presentation." So thank you, Mike. I think you've said what everybody else here is feeling. We are so grateful to Greg Kelly for giving this presentation not once, but twice. And Greg was wondering what it would be like not to give it to a live audience. But Greg, having seen it before a live audience, having seen it now, it was terrific. So thank you very much. And audience, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it rewarding and informative, and I hope you know a lot more about Special Forces than you did before. So this concludes our presentation. And again, thank you for being with us. We will see you next time. And good afternoon, everybody.